Today, Dr. Charles Crenshaw is chairman of the surgery department at John Peter Smith Hospital in Fort Worth. But in the early 1960s, he was a third-year resident at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, assigned to the trauma team, where he had observed hundreds of gunshot wounds.
And then he was wrapped in a sheet, and we placed him in a coffin. But before we did, I looked at the wound again. I wanted to know and remember this the rest of my life. And the rest of my life, I will always know he was shot from the front. And the rest of my life, I will always know he was shot from the front.
And then all of a sudden, his head literally explodes, and he's thrown violently backward and to the left. And I thought, the way that bullet looked, that bullet came from the grassy knoll and the picket fence. And that's where that bullet came from. On that day, about noon, I was in the operating room at Parkland, and so I went and peeked out the door, and standing there was Dr. Chuck Crenshaw, one of our senior surgery residents.
The official version has Lee Harvey Oswald firing from behind. From what you say and what you're describing, he was shot from the front.
That's correct.
Meaning there had to be two gunmen.
At least one, and maybe two more.
And you believe that?
I'll always believe that.
And when I got there, I said, my God, I said, have you seen the back of his head? And they said, no, we just walked in here before you did, and we haven't seen anything but this hole in his neck. And I said, well, there's a wound in the back of his head here on the right side that's at least 5 inches in diameter, a circular wound far in the back of his head.
The Warren Commission investigation concluded the shots came only from behind. Dr. Crenshaw says they're wrong. The bullet struck about where and passed about where?
From here
Right.
through.
And taking out
The back, or the occipital part. The back of your head.
And I could actually look down within the skull cavity and see that the whole right back half of the right cerebral hemisphere was gone.
This was gone, in our view, and that's the reason we could see the cerebellum.
Had the bullet come from the back, what would have been the difference?
It would have been much different. It would have gone a little more anterior and be a bigger blaster.
It seems almost incomprehensible that a team of highly intelligent, highly trained doctors could be standing over the President of the United States and see wounds that you say came from the front, and yet the official government story is it came from the back, and wait this long to break the silence.
Intimidation, fear, and career-mindedness.
Those were the factors.
Exactly. Dr. Baxter had wanted no one to say anything because he was worried about commercialization.
Well, I made the statement that any one of us in the school or in the hospital that ever made a dime off of anything they said about the assassination, I would try to see that their medical career was ruined.
But again, you have to understand the time in 1963. The people that were with this country were telling you what to do, how to do it, and I think the feeling was we went along to get along.
Could the, what you call a conspiracy of silence, have been out of plain old-fashioned patriotism among the doctors?
No question about that.
The normal sequence of if somebody dies in the emergency room from trauma or a gunshot wound, they then go to the medical examiner's area,
Yeah.
Dr. Rose, and actually have an autopsy.
That's right.
And that was circumvented by the Secret Service.
That's right. And so what happened, about to leave the hospital and take the president's body and put it into that ambulance. So Dr. Rose said with a good deal of reluctance, I got up, stepped out into the hall, and held my hand up and stopped them and told them, I said, I'm required by law to let you know that any murder that's committed in this state, the person must undergo an autopsy by a forensic pathologist. The Secret Service man, who was unencumbered by the machine gun, walked over to him, put his hands underneath his armpits, lifted him up off the ground, and set him over against the wall. Lifted him up off the
Physically.
floor and set him over against the wall and shook his finger in his face, didn't say anything, and then turned back to the gurney, and they rolled on out to the hospital, to the ambulance.
That's the reason I waited so long. I waited until I felt I'm at the end of my career. I don't fear my peers, because I think they believe it too.
Today, at the School Book Depository Museum, among the exhibits, is a display of a few sketches of the Kennedy autopsy, along with the official explanation that the wounds were from bullets fired only from the rear.
What was your reaction when you saw the results, photographs and the sketches from Bethesda, the autopsy done there?
It was beyond disbelief for me. I could not believe that a real pathologist would put out something this poorly.
Was this the same man you saw as far as John Kennedy, the same body that you observed?
Not from the pictures that I saw. And I put him in the coffin.
So you say their report in effect is a fraud?
I say that it's wrongly done, and the way it was done, maybe they were directed to do it that way.
Tom, how does his story compare with that of other doctors who were in that room when the president died?
Hugh, most of the doctors there immediately after his death said they thought the gunshots came from the front, but when they got later autopsy information,
Intimidation, fear, and career-mindedness.
they changed their mind and either said no, they agreed with the Warren Commission, or they weren't sure of the direction.
He hit somewhere along the hairline, tangentially went across the skull and out the back, low in the back of the skull.
Yesterday, I talked to Richard Mosk, who was a young commission staffer at that time on the Warren Commission, and he's very firm in his saying that he and other members of the commission really believe they did everything they could and that all the answers are in the report.
Well, perhaps so, but maybe they closed the report too early. To have not gotten to someone like Crenshaw and put his views in, for example, is a failing. Also, there seemed to have been a failing in a number of other areas as far as information that basically just has been surfacing that's not in the report.
Because the wound in the back and the wound in the front were essentially the same in appearance, both of them looked like entry wounds.
How did you feel about the Warren report's final report and summary?
Well, of course, that's kind of colored now by my knowing what happened after that the House Special Select Assassinations Committee came up with a totally different view of what happened.
Tell us about that. Yeah.
Did not agree with that. Well, as you say, there was a single bullet theory, at least in regard to that bullet that hit the president, also causing Connolly's wounds, which was very unlikely.
Right, and Connolly denied being shot at the same time.
That's right. He said that was not his. Well, and then in 1976, because probably at least 3/4 of the nation didn't believe this was not a conspiracy, that there were more than one gunman, which automatically meant there was a conspiracy. And so what they decided, after studying this for 3 years, from 1976 to 1979, that House Special Select Committee concluded that in all probability, that's why the way they stated, there was a conspiracy. However, they also stated that we're not at liberty to release all the details of that until 2029, which struck, I think, all of us as, why is that?
After the medical team had done their best, had worked as hard as they could and realized it was hopeless, was there time for tears among those who had put so much emotion and effort into this?
Just before the cleanup really started, there was blood and bandages on the floor. His back brace was askewed on the wall. I think it got to me most when I looked and saw the red roses of Mrs. Kennedy in the kick bucket there at the head of the table. And there his blood was still dripping on it.